A new report from NBC News is exposing the unsanitary and dangerous conditions the US military personnel and their family members are forced to deal with as they live on US bases worldwide. Now, I just want you all to remember how much money Congress allocates to the State Department for defense every year. Every year the amount goes up. And where does that money go? Does it go toward our soldiers? Does it go toward their pay or making their living conditions better? No. It appears that money mostly goes to defense contractors, companies like Boeing that have proven to be failures in recent years. But I'll give you those numbers in a moment. First, let's talk about the conditions that these Americans are dealing with, and it's infuriating. So Hots&Cots, which is an organization dedicated to improving the quality of life for these service members, is basically leading this effort to do something about those terrible living conditions, okay? So they're working with other advocacy groups to do it. And they allow service members to upload like reviews and photos of the barracks anonymously. They then submit some of the following examples to the press, like NBC News. NBC News then publishes it. So that's how we're able to know about what these military members of the military personnel and their families are dealing with. So for instance, there's mold, black mold on the ceiling of a dining room in the US Army garrison Red Cloud in South Korea. And if you're thinking, well, maybe it's like a international thing, like we don't treat members of our military like that here in the United States, do we? We do. So take a look at this dark brown water coming out of a faucet at the Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst barracks in New Jersey. That's disgusting. Okay, brown, dirty water that can't be safe to drink. Roaches and mice found at Randolph Air Force Base near San Antonio and Fort Campbell. Another photo that was provided also showed the temperature inside a building at Fort Liberty, which was formerly known as Fort Bragg in North Carolina, hitting a whopping 93 degrees. This is indoors. So it's one thing when it's like super hot outside, but you're able to escape indoors where it's supposed to be cooler. 93 degrees is unbearable to live in. And by the way, this isn't the first time that these conditions, these horrible conditions have been reported. I remember talking about this last year. In September of 2023, the Government Accountability Office released a report that also highlighted the poor living conditions in government-owned barracks and in military housing owned and operated by private companies. And remember, the public-private partnership model works as follows. There's a private company, they take government grants, and they want to skim off as much of that money for themselves as possible. So they spend as little as possible on the very thing that they're supposed to be spending the money on. That's what's happening here. Okay, it's disgusting. So the GAO report had recommended that the Department of Defense provide more oversight of housing, but it looks like even with a little more oversight, nothing has changed in regard to the conditions that these people are living in. And after the report, the Army conducted an inspection of their 6,700 barracks buildings last year. And according to military.com, 23% of them are in poor or failing conditions. It's so infuriating, especially, John, when you consider we're getting real close to now allocating nearly $1 trillion a year to defense. And very little of that money actually goes to taking care of our soldiers, taking care of our veterans. It's sick. This is super sick. And I'm going to break down the numbers and funding in just a moment, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, you're going to provide more numbers, but the total number of barracks number, I think, stood out to me. I mean, that's one of the reasons we have this problem, not why it should be at 23% of those having these issues, but we just have so many bases here in the United States across the vast majority of the countries in the world. We have so much that even if there was a proper allocation of those funds to the people who actually need it, we'd probably end up in a pretty bad spot. And obviously that isn't happening. We just need to have fewer of these facilities. Why do we need to have all of these bases? Why
Yeah.
is the debate about whether we should have bases in a certain country not even a thing that we do? Like there was a
Yeah.
time, like 20 years ago, there was like a commission that looked into some of it. And I understand that's a little bit wonky, but we just assume, well, first of all, most Americans probably don't even know that we have military facilities in dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of countries. But if they did, maybe we could have a conversation about whether we should or not. And for the vast majority of Americans, you tell them that we're gonna spend the better part of $1 trillion, maybe hitting that number when you count the special funding to like Ukraine and things like that. That would seem to be enough to create a military if you didn't have one, let alone to maintain a military in cockroach-free environments. And so it's an absolute mess, and very few politicians even care to talk about it.
Yeah, you make an excellent point. And in fact, a point that I hadn't thought of because it really isn't an issue that's ever debated. But on top of that, this story, I can't help but think about one of the issues in the military right now that keeps popping up. And it's the issue of the State Department having trouble recruiting Americans to even be part of the military. And so the chickens have come home to roost. And if you treat soldiers like this, if you treat their family members on these bases like this, Americans are going to find out about it, and they're going to maybe rethink any consideration they had to join the military. And there's other issues as well, including risking the lives of Americans in wars abroad that we really shouldn't be involved in anyway, right? So just a point that I wanted to note. Now, what's the issue? Representative Richard Hudson, who's a Republican from North Carolina who supports Hots&Cots, explained to NBC News that every year the Army appropriates money for improving our soldiers' housing. The problem is that these funds are not being used efficiently to ensure necessary basic living conditions for our service members. And according to the Government Accountability Office, while billions are spent by the Department of Defense each year for facilities, it's actually unable to identify how much of that funding actually goes toward the facilities. And it's partly because of that whole public-private partnership, right? And so, for example, the DoD requested about $15 billion for overall facility sustainment for fiscal year 2024, but could not identify how much of this total would be spent toward barracks. In addition, the DoD did not know how much it spent on housing allowances for service members who would normally be required to live in barracks, but did not because of insufficient space or poor living conditions. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's embarrassing. And take a look at this graph. You'll be able to visualize what I said earlier. Year after year, we just increase funding for the State Department, for the military. Military spending in 2019, for instance, was $734.34 billion. By the time we get to fiscal year 2023, that number goes up to nearly $1 trillion. $1 trillion, guys. Like, let that sink in. 916 billion. And when you look at those numbers and you think about how, again, our soldiers are treated, how they're paid, how little they're paid, how they're living, and how our vets are treated, how does that not enrage you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%. And the issue has always been that at various points you've had like one party maybe that talks more about the military. I mean, I'm sure you remember in the aftermath of 9/11, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, you had the Republicans like bashing people over the head with the fact that they need to support the troops. But what I always loved about that saying, like support the troops, is it's just abstract. It's troops.
It was about supporting the war. It wasn't about 100%. The troop. It was supporting.
It's never about supporting a soldier, a group of soldiers, actually making sure that they are safe, that their lives are not needlessly sacrificed, that when they come back, they're better than they were when they left. It's never about that. It's about an abstract concept of troops. And like even when Donald Trump talks about military funding, because he wants to increase it even more, he talks about how we don't have any bullets anymore or whatever, which is obviously laughable. But like, can you conceive of him talking about the fact that they have poor water, that it's too hot. Like those sorts of things wouldn't even cross his mind. A person who's desperately trying to use these people as a political tool, he wouldn't even think to talk about their quality of life.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members, because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us. Become a young Turk.